Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Pearson's Insight webinar number 13, Making 20% Off the Job Work. If this is your first Insight webinar, we hope you'll find it a useful experience, and if you'd attended one before, then very welcome back to you. Those of you who have attended a previous event in this series or downloaded the slides from those will know that this series is designed to shed some light on the new apprenticeships regime, and it's impossible to do that without eventually arriving at this topic. Since the government adopted the Richard Review, the most debate has focused on issues surrounding the levy itself and then subsequently on the introduction of endpoint assessment. However, now that the new funding regime has kicked in, this third topic has come up on the rails and is starting to focus all of our minds. On the 20% off the job requirement, opinion is divided. There are those who have willingly embraced it. There are those who have accepted it with a shrug, knowing that this is something that they have done for many years anyway. And this goes all the way through to those who have actually taken to the education media to blame the rule for the slowdown in apprenticeship starts. The one constant in this debate has been the government, which has shown little to no inclination to budge or to change anything to do with the 20% off the job requirement. And so here we are today to listen to some voices from around the sector about how the requirement can be implemented in practice. So, who are those voices? The voice you're hearing now, I'm Neil Ingo, I'm the head of marketing here at Pearson, and I'm your host for today. I am pleased to welcome Jonathan Bourne, Managing Director of Daymar Training, and Karen Murray, Apprenticeship Officer from multinational law firm Princeton Masons. And I'm also joined by two of my colleagues here from Pearson, Ricardo Bertoldo, who's an apprentice working on the Associate Project Manager pathway, and his line manager, Catherine Newman, our Director of BTEC and Apprenticeship Sales. I'd like to briefly, if this is the first time that you're joining one of our webinars, briefly give you a little bit of background about Pearson and why we feel qualified to run these webinars and provide advice and guidance to you around apprenticeships. There's two reasons for that. Not only are we an employer of apprentices, but we're a leading provider of apprenticeship services, along with being the largest awarding organisation in the UK. And you may know us for our qualification brands such as EdExcel and BTEC. And we're also the owner of newer initiatives like the private university Pearson College. We have 3,000 to 4,000 employees in the UK, some of whom are apprentices, and that makes us your peer because we are a substantial levy payer with 4,000 employees in the UK. We relaunched our apprenticeship program in May 2017 with 30 apprentices. Now in 2018, there are 88 apprentices, 16 programs, and by the end of this year, there will be over 100 apprentices in Pearson. I'm actually very pleased to say that one of those 88 apprentices is sitting next to me working the controls of this event. So today's schedule. I'm going to quickly run through at a very high level the 20% off the job requirement. This will probably be news to nobody on this call. I'm then going to hand over to Jonathan to give us the training provider's perspective, then to Karen to give us the employer's perspective, and then finally to Ricardo and Catherine to look at the apprentice and the line manager's perspective on this most important issue. And then we'll come back for a bit of a wrap up and final questions. So the 20% off the job requirement, what is it? Well, the core principles of apprenticeship quality as laid down in the Richard Review were that apprenticeship should lead to a skilled occupation. And of course, a skilled occupation can mean many different things in many different sectors. There is a requirement that substantial and sustained training should be part of apprenticeship programs in a minimum of 12 months duration, and that 20% of this should now be off the job. And that applies to both people doing the new standards pathways, but also those who are starting on SACE frameworks, which incidentally is a rather common myth that those have disappeared. There are actually many, including Lauren, our apprentice, who's controlling the event today. There are many who that are still open for new starts. All apprentices should have demonstrable transferable skills in English and maths, and on completion of their apprenticeship, they should be at full occupational competency and capability. And if professional recognition is available, the apprenticeship should lead them to the point where they would qualify for that professional recognition. Now, the requirement definition is solely that the 20% off the job training must be carried out outside the normal day-to-day working environment. However, there are wording and guidance that the government itself has provided suggests that it's not the place, it's the task that matters most. So, for example, training to teach somebody to use a new machine or a new computer program that they haven't previously come across before can be considered part of the 20% off the job requirement. It should not be part of someone's normal day-to-day working duties. And across the period of the apprenticeship as a whole, 20% of employed time must be spent working off the job. So in practice, that includes teaching theory that's necessary to underpin the apprentice's understanding of their job, practical training such as shadowing, mentoring, industry visits, learning support, assessments, assignment writing. 20% of their employed time over the period of the apprenticeship, and anything that they do outside of hours should be recognised, and they should be able to claim time off in lieu for it. And where? Well, this is where some of the confusion has arisen. Where is away from the normal working environment, not necessarily away from their desk, but away from what they are normally supposed to be doing in the normal run of their job role. And it's the activity, not the location, that determines whether or not the training meets this definition. So, to give a little bit more of a practical perspective, I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Jonathan Bourne from Daymar Training, and he's going to take us through a few slides outlining how his training provider has approached this requirement with some of his clients.
Neil, many thanks for that introduction. Yes, as you were saying, I'm director of a provider called Daymar Training. We're based in Stockport and Greater Manchester, but actually work across the country. In terms of my experience and apprenticeship standards, we've begun delivering Trailblazer apprenticeships, so the forerunners of the current standards, in about 2016. We've now got apprentices on 11 different standards. We've been involved in the development of several of the standards as well. And in terms of sort of the sector, and I'm also a director of the Greater Manchester Learning Provider Network. So we've been closely involved in the evolution, both the evolution of standards and actually 20% off the job since the beginning. I think one thing for us and I think in general is rather than just jumping as a provider, one of the approach that we've taken is rather than just jumping into what is 20% off the job and how do we count it. I think it's important to think about why it's there in the first place and get a bit of context, because if we get that bit right, then on the whole, the 20% and getting that right falls out of the process. This repeats a little bit of what Neil was saying a moment ago, but I think it is helpful just to very briefly remind ourselves why it's there. Too many old apprenticeships had too little learning content. Some apprenticeships focused largely on the accreditation of existing skills. There wasn't enough in there about the developing of new skills and increasing of knowledge, skills and behaviours. And as well, some employers weren't necessarily giving apprentices enough time to study, and particularly important with these new apprenticeship standards where frankly there's a great deal more content than there was in many of the old apprenticeship framework. So I think one sort of point at the beginning is rather than just jumping into how we count 20%, we do need to spend a little bit of time thinking about why they're there. I think another important thing in terms of context is the fact that for apprenticeship standards, it's worth remembering they're only approved in the first place by the Institute of Apprenticeships if they are felt to be challenging enough to require at least 20% off the job learning for the average apprentice. And I think that's really helpful actually for employers and providers. The standard has been designed around 20% off the job in the first place. That leads on logically, I think, to the second point on this slide, which is that really therefore, to be eligible, your apprentice needs to be assessed at the beginning as needing at least 20% off the job for at least 12 months, which is the minimum period for most apprenticeships. Obviously, some apprenticeships have a slightly longer minimum period in order to complete successfully. So if we get that bit right about the apprentice needing at least 20% off the job at the beginning, then we start off on the right footing. I think it's important too, as a provider or an employer, you think about your strategy with off the job, to recognise and be honest about the fact that there are some challenges with a very literal interpretation of off the job. The rules, the funding rules, and many of you will know them in detail, are very literal. The quote on the left-hand side of this slide is from the 17-18 funding rules. The 18-19 funding rules, as you know, were published at the back end of last week. They say, and this is just a straight quote, at least 20%. So it's worth mentioning and just underlining that at least it can be more than 20%. 20% isn't the be all and end all. If an apprentice needs more than 20%, actually the rules say that they must have more than 20% over the planned duration of the apprenticeship must be spent on off-the-job training. Evidence must be available to support the training delivered. We'll come on to that a little bit more in a second. That doesn't necessarily mean that exact timing records have to be kept, but evidence must be available to support the training delivered. And paid hours, as we know, is the apprentice's contracted hours, so work that is undertaken in time that isn't sort of part of the apprenticeship agreement, the apprentice employment contract, doesn't count. That's from Rule 36 of the rules. There are some oddities around that. I think one of the most striking ones is this one on the right-hand side of the page, where you could, for example, have two apprentices, both with similar learning needs. You might have apprentice A on a 30-hour week, apprentice B on a 45-hour week. It's an apprenticeship with a 12-month duration. Well, apprentice A logically needs 312 hours to complete their apprenticeship. Apprentice B on a 45-hour working week needs to do 468 hours of off-the-job learning. And for me, really, that just sums up this underlying point that when we're interpreting 20%, the 20% rule, we mustn't lose sight of that underlying goal, i.e. apprentices need to be making good progress, they need to achieve, they need to enhance existing skills and develop new ones, and demonstrate behaviours in their place of work that employers value. A couple of just tiny things related to those hours that come out of the 18-19 funding rules that have just been published. 20% from August only applies up until the point when apprentices go through the gateway to endpoint assessment, which I think is a really helpful change, because in that period post-gateway, in some cases, the apprentice would have finished all of their substantive learning, and also statutory holidays have been excluded from the 20% rule. So actually, my example there, about 312 hours, if you take that apprentice's statutory holidays into account, it'll be slightly less. Over the next few slides, what we've done is just worked through the journey, really, and I think that's helpful to think about what do we do before the apprenticeship starts, how we get ourselves set up for success, if you like, with 20% off the job, how we monitor it through the process, and what happens at the end. Before the apprenticeship starts, I think this first question is really critical, and actually the updated funding rules with the emphasis on initial assessment, I think, underline this. It's this simple question: does my apprentice need at least 20% off the job learning in order to reach the standard of competence required for the apprenticeship? Because if the gap in skills, knowledge and behaviours is too small to require 20% for the minimum job, then an apprenticeship isn't the right vehicle, and actually I don't think the apprentice is eligible because there isn't sufficient learning for them to do. So agreement at the beginning on the size of that competency gap is really important in terms of eligibility, but it also helps drive the programme length and content, and it ensures that we've got the appropriate level of buy-in from employers and apprentices. So get initial assessment right, and I think providers and employers and apprentices actually are already on the right track. that. Then we get into how we evidence that 20% at the outset. And as many of you will be aware, the primary source of that evidence is this evidence pack, and the most important things in there are the training plan and the commitment statement. That's the opportunity for the employer, the apprentice and the provider all to agree to and sign up for what the training will look like. And that document, or that combination of documents, has to show in sufficient detail how the off-the-job learning will be made up. I'm not going to go into here into the varieties of off-the-job learning that can count. We've got some good content on that coming up in a few minutes, but I would also recommend that you have a look at the DFE guidance, which is very good. There's also some good guidance from the AELP, the Association of Education and Learning Providers, on what can be included. So that training plan, commitment statement at DAMAR, we have a commitment statement and embed the final draft of the training plan inside that, and that goes through the training and where the 20% off the job learning will come from in some detail. Then during the apprenticeship, I think there is a question about whether providers, employers seek to time record in detail or not. And I think there are different schools of thought on this. Personally, and for us as a provider, we've taken the view that on the whole, spending a lot of time scurrying around time recording might actually send us off in the wrong direction, for a number of reasons. One, it's actually very difficult to record with precision the amount of time that an apprentice is spending in learning on and off the job. Second, it might mean that we focus more on quantity and totting up minutes and hours of off the job than on quality. So the approach that we've taken is not to time record, but to evidence record in some detail. And there are a number of things that we're doing there. Reflective journals, we're finding are a really useful, flexible way for apprentices and tutors, but apprentices really, to make a note of what they're learning and what they're doing in terms of their apprenticeship. I think that progress reviews, particularly in the context of standards, are a really important tool as well. When we've got apprenticeship standards that don't have embedded qualifications, it becomes harder to measure progress, or we need to find new ways to measure progress. We've developed a series of midpoint reviews in all of our apprenticeship standards, which, if you like, are sort of super progress reviews, and they mimic to some extent the final endpoint assessment. And their purpose is to make sure that between one midpoint review and the last one, the knowledge, skills and behaviours of the apprentice has increased to the right degree, i.e. in accordance with the training plan. And if it has, then in theory at least, the right amount of learning for that apprenticeship must be in there. This sounds a little bit odd in a way, evidencing 20% on completion. You might wonder why on earth we need to evidence off the job on completion, but in some ways I think an apprentice successfully completing is kind of the best evidence of all, provided that that initial assessment at the beginning has been robust and the apprentice has completed their apprenticeship standard in the planned time. If both of those things are the case, and assuming that the apprentice hasn't done lots of work at home in their own time outside contracted hours, then actually the right level of off-the-job learning must logically have taken place, because standards have only been approved on the basis that 20% is in there in the first place, if you see what I mean. So it's worth thinking about where during the journey you're going to be evidencing 20%. Onto a couple of real life examples, and these are things that we have in place with a number of our employers at the moment, and there's nothing sort of particularly groundbreaking about any of these, but it's just to show you how it works. The example on the left legal services employer, actually, I think that the same, or some of these points apply to any professional services employers. That first point, reduction in billable hours, I think is an important consideration. Of course, apprentices won't always, in professional services firms, have billable hours targets, but as they get into their apprenticeships, very often they will, and it's important that billable hours targets are workable in the context of off the job. Study clubs that a couple of our employers are using, there's a sort of tucked around a contractual lunch break. These are in premises that are big enough for apprentices to have some quiet space in which to study together. That's working quite well. And if we put that in with webinar and e-workshop attendance, internal training, and actually one-to-one tutor visits should be on this left-hand list as well, and revision days in the run-up to exams. These are apprentices who've got quite a heavy exam burden within their apprenticeship. You can see we're quite easily at over 20% actually. And then on the right-hand side, this is a large retail employer. And we've looked at where during the working week it's a little bit quieter and apprentices can have some protected study time. So that's a couple of 2.5-hour sessions in the week. We bring apprentices together for that employer in a full-day workshop every few weeks, every 6 weeks or so. They also have an online tutorial for an hour a week, and we also have one-to-one trainer visits. So again, you can see there that we're well over that 20%. And that is all from me, unless anyone's got any questions at this stage. Thank you. Neil, are we back to you?
Yeah, we're back to me very briefly. I've just got a couple of questions. It seems like an overwhelmingly obvious idea to me, Jonathan. Could an apprentice's calendar, their work calendar, their email, Gmail, Outlook calendar be used as evidence, or would that be considered too open to doctoring, shall we say? Is that likely to meet what the ESFA are looking for?
Well, I think an apprentice's calendar could be used as part of the story, if you like. I think in most cases, evidence is sort of comprises, I suppose, like evidence in a court case. It comes from a number of different areas, and so I suspect on audit, both Ofsted, if they had any concerns about off the job, or ESFA, or the ESFA, would want to be looking, if you like, the full story and the weight of what the activity was and what was going on. So if in the apprentice's Outlook calendar, you could see very clearly that he or she, with the support of their supervisor, had boxed off periods of study time every week, and there was evidence that that study was actively taking place. So, for example, there were nice little notes in a reflective journal of the apprentice saying what they'd done and how they find it, or some other form of evidence. Then I certainly think that could form part of the story.
Thanks for that, Jonathan. We've had one question come in on the chat, which is just confirmation around statutory holidays having been excluded from that 20% off the job requirement, which I believe would be so, because a statutory holiday would not be contractual work. Is that correct?
Yes, I want to have a look at this rule, actually, because it strikes me that it might give rise to one or two further questions, because of course employers and apprentices are free to, and employers and employees are free to agree whatever holidays they like, provided they stick to the statutory minimum, which I think is something like 20 days plus statutory and bank holidays, so roughly 25, 27 days a year. I'm not quite sure how that deals with, let's say, the school or the employer that has much greater contractual holidays. If somebody's got a contractual entitlement to 10 weeks holiday a year, but their statutory entitlement is 4 or 5 weeks, it strikes me there's a bit of a tension between the two there. So it'd be interesting to see how that works out, I think.
Okay, thanks for that, Jonathan. Just one more question around whether or not 20% could be recorded and undertaken via a web-based portal like an LMS. Yes, I imagine it can, and yes, I imagine that a number of people are developing such systems at the moment, shall we say. Okay, Lauren, have any more questions coming for Jonathan at this point? Okay. In that case, we'll move on to our next presenter, who is Karen Murray, who is one of Jonathan's clients, and she joins us from the offices of Princeton Masons. Karen, are you there?
Perfect. Thanks very much, Neil, and hello everyone. I'm Karen Murray, and I've been working in the role of Apprenticeship Officer at Princeton Masons since October 2017. I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to share information about the apprenticeship programme at Princeton Masons with all of you, and to talk about our experience of managing the requirement for at least 20% off-the-job training for apprentices. I thought the logical starting point would be to provide a very quick introduction to Princeton Masons as a firm and an introduction to our apprenticeship programme. So Princeton Masons is a full-service international commercial law firm. Our lawyers deliver innovative legal solutions and services to a diverse range of clients. They advise on high-profile and cutting-edge national and international deals and transactions. So Princeton Masons have a bold vision of being an international market leader in our global sectors by 2020. And those global sectors are advanced manufacturing and technology, energy, financial services, infrastructure, and real estate. We definitely have a global reach at Princeton Masons. We're a growing business and now have 24 offices worldwide, most recently including Perth in Australia, Dublin, and Madrid. So our current headcount figures are shown on the slide, and the success of the business is based on our people, which absolutely includes all of our early talent programs. So we have a very established early talent team at Princeton Masons, and in the UK we manage the School Work Experience programme, a vacation placement programme for university students, a training contract graduate programme, and most recently that has expanded to include an apprenticeship programme as well. So the Princeton Masons Apprenticeship Programme was launched for the first time in November 2017. We have a legal apprenticeship programme and a business operations apprenticeship programme. We're still within our pilot year, so still learning and getting to grips with apprenticeships and the requirements, so very much still within our pilot year. At Princeton Masons, the apprenticeship levy was one of the main influencing factors for the business for deciding to introduce an apprenticeship programme. But equally, having an apprenticeship programme also allows us to further diversify our talent pools and recruit candidates from a wider range of backgrounds. And that is a huge priority for us at Princeton Masons, as I'm sure it is for many other organisations that are on the webinar today. So we do work in partnership with Jonathan and his team at DMAR Training. They are the providers of the technical apprenticeship training. We also work with the University of Law as a three-way partnership in conjunction with DMAR Training as well for the legal apprenticeship training. We work very closely with Jonathan and the University of Law. So overall, our pilot cohort is made up of 20 apprentices. It's not huge numbers, but I think for a pilot group, it's very healthy numbers. All of our apprentices were recruited externally back in November 2017. The majority of them are A-level school leavers. One of them did go to university, but then decided it wasn't the right path and switched on to the apprenticeship route. And for now, we don't have any current employees who have then since started an apprenticeship programme. So those 20 apprentices are doing 3 different pathways. We've got a paralegal apprenticeship programme, an accountancy apprenticeship programme, and we've got one apprentice doing a business administration apprenticeship programme. All of those are level 3 apprenticeship standards, and all of our apprentices are based in our English offices, so that is London, Birmingham, Manchester and Leeds. So initial feedback from the supervisors and the teams that have an apprentice so far is that the apprentices are very eager, they're very willing to learn, integrating well into departments and helping to contribute to meeting business needs. So all very positive feedback so far. So moving on to talk about the 20% of the job training requirements specifically. So our paralegal and accounts apprentices spend each Monday out of the office at the University of Law campus. So this enables both us as a firm, Princeton Masons as a firm, and our apprentices to evidence compliance with the 20% of the job training requirements. Our apprenticeship programme has been introduced since the new standards came into force, and in some ways that may have then been easier to implement this 1 day out of the office per week model compared with an organisation that maybe already had an established apprenticeship programme and then had to change the format and delivery. But when we decided to bring in the apprenticeship programme, we very clearly managed expectations within the business. Since the design of the programme, we were aware that the apprentices would be spending 1 day out of the week, 1 day per week out of the office. When we approached teams and partners to request that they take on an apprentice, they were always aware that the resource would only be in the office 4 days per week. The paralegal apprenticeship programme especially is very technical, has a lot of content, and what we didn't want was for the apprentices to fall into the habit of coming into the office when they should be blocking out time in their diary to do the apprenticeship studying and actually get caught up in emails or projects when they should be focusing on their studying. The University of Law, in addition, also provides a variety of different resources that our apprentices then have access to, so whether it be online or at the actual physical library. That was a really useful aspect for us, for our apprentices to get that access to a wider range of resources. And as I've mentioned, most of our apprentices are A-level school leavers, so we thought having that structured 1 day per week out of the office that's dedicated to study would help with their transition coming from a school, college environment into a working environment. They had that 1 day per week that was theirs, that was dedicated to study. So that Monday, 1 day out of the office per week can vary every week. So some days a tutor from DMAR actually comes in to University of Law and does a tutor session with them, answers questions, but they also could be doing online webinars and online workshops. They might have written assignments that they could be doing. There's also time built in for self-study. If they've got an exam coming up, they can dedicate the time to preparing for the exam, researching, reading materials, and also because all of the apprentices are out of the office and at the University of Law, they can have peer discussions, group discussions amongst themselves during that day. So that's the structure of the 1 day out of the week per office. But in addition to that, we also have, as a firm, a number of internal training that could also be classed or count towards the 20% of the job training. For example, our trainee solicitors who are in the business every 6 months move to a different department, and our apprentices can also, when the trainees move departments, they undertake intense department training to get up to speed in their new roles, and our apprentices have the opportunity to go along to that induction training as well. It could be anything from half a day to 2 days of intense training, technical training specific to the department that they are in. Our learning and development team at Princeton Masons also run training courses that are available to all employees, including apprentices, and that training could be anything from improving business writing skills to working with Excel, delivering presentations, and that also is available for our apprentices to sign up for. We have a mentor programme at Princeton Masons, so all of our apprentices have been assigned a mentor in the workplace. Those mentors were volunteers, and they were either trainee solicitors or experienced paralegals or somebody in the same department or area of work but slightly more experienced that the apprentices could speak to confidentially, can meet with on a regular basis just to get advice and ask questions of. All of our apprentices also have a workplace tutor from Daymar, and that tutor comes into the office every 5 to 6 weeks on average to meet with them and do the workplace review meetings. So the feedback that we've had from our apprentices on the approach that we've taken has been really positive. They appreciate that they have that 1 day per week that's theirs to focus on their study and on their assignments. On a Friday, they set their out of office in the afternoon, and then they're not expected to log back in or check emails until they arrive back at the office on the Tuesday morning. So they have 7 to 8 hours every week where they can do webinars, they can do coursework, they can structure the day how they want, but they absolutely do have that one dedicated study day. And we've had feedback from the apprentices that they feel that this demonstrates St Mason's commitment to helping them develop and to support them in their studies. At the very start of the programme, I would say we did have some feedback from apprentices that there maybe wasn't enough content or they didn't have enough work to fill the full day out of the office, but that was only very early into the programme. I would say within a couple of weeks, as they got past the initial induction stages, the workload very quickly ramped up, and they're very appreciative of the day out of the office to just focus on study. I would also say it's a really good way to help build a really supportive a peer group amongst the apprentices, because they are all, when they go to the University of Law, they've got a room that it's just St Mason's apprentices within that room. They are very supportive of each other, they're a very close-knit group, and that they help each other to study. If somebody's maybe stuck with one part as a group, they can discuss it and talk it out and provide that support to each other, which I think was really important, especially in the first few months, as they're adjusting to working life and professional services environment. Having that peer support amongst themselves was really important as well. In terms of the feedback from the wider business, we haven't had any feedback to date, and as I said, it is a new programme, but to date we haven't had any feedback from supervisors or departments that this off-the-job training model isn't working. They know that when the apprentices come in every week from Tuesday to Friday, they are completely dedicated to their work, so their projects and their work-based tasks, that's Tuesday to Friday, and all of their apprenticeship study is undertaken on that Monday when they're out of the office. So we do have, as I mentioned, we do have 3 apprenticeship routes. So for the apprentice, we've only got one apprentice on the Business Administration Apprenticeship Programme at the moment, but we have taken a different approach to the off-the-job training for this apprentice. This apprentice has their training delivered at the St Mason's office. Their workplace tutor comes out to the St Mason's office every 5 to 6 weeks on average and has a review meeting. At the review meeting, the tutor sets tasks for the apprentice to complete before the next meeting in 5 to 6 weeks. The apprentice then blocks time in his diary at a time that suits the team in order for him to complete the tasks. And the workplace tutor also provides guidance on what the apprentice should be recording as off-the-job training while he's in the workplace. So I was initially a bit concerned about how we would manage that. Would it be the responsibility of the apprentice to keep track of the 20%? Is it the supervisor, the workplace tutor, or just how are we going to manage that? But as Jonathan mentioned earlier in the presentation, the focus shouldn't be on the time recording aspect. We've taken the decision, as Jonathan has recommended and Daymar advised, is that it's more focused on, at the workplace review meetings, is the apprentice able to demonstrate that they have enough evidence for their reflective journals, that they are getting the right evidence to discuss at their midpoint assessment to show that they are meeting the requirements of the standard, and if so, they then in theory are getting the 20% off the job training. So that's the approach that we've taken for the business admin apprenticeship programme. This approach works well for the team, excuse me, that the apprentice is in. It's our responsible business team. So they have a number of events that run throughout the year. So when it's a particularly busy time for the team, that the apprentice is needed in the office and is needed there to support with the organisation and running of events, he can focus purely on work and those priorities. But then if it's a slightly quieter time for the team, we can be flexible about when he books the time out of his diary to go and focus specifically on his apprenticeship training. So that works really well for the apprentice. He's getting really good hands-on experience, getting involved in a lot of work, but it also works really well for the team because they have a dedicated resource when needed, when the team is really busy. I would say that works really well for us because his team and his supervisor are very supportive. They were very involved in the recruitment of that apprentice and, you know, very supportive in giving him the time that he needs away from his desk to do the off-the-job training, which has absolutely been key to the success of this particular format for the apprenticeship training. So this slide here, our account manager at the Education and Skills Funding Agency provided me with a document with this document here, which is a chart of all of the different activities that can be used for 20% off the job training. Now, I found this really useful because some of the things you might not consider or have thought of as being eligible to be considered for the 20% off the job training. So I thought I would share it with all of you because I found it very useful when we initially hired our business administration apprentice, shared that with the team and with the apprentice, just so when they were doing these things, they could be recording that in their reflective journal as evidence of off-the-job training. So coming up for Princeton Masons, we will shortly be starting recruitment for an information security apprentice. This will be, again, a different delivery model with that apprentice likely undertaking training at Princeton Masons, but also having a block release. So actually for 1 week every couple of months, we'll be out of the office and attending a dedicated training facility. That apprenticeship hasn't started yet, so I can't go into too many details about, you know, how that 20% model will work. But again, the supervisor has been very, very active in agreeing with the delivery model and supportive of the block release and training at Princeton Masons offices, which I'm sure will be key to the success of this programme, having the supervisor involved in the delivery and agreeing the structure of the programme before we actually proceed with the recruitment of an information security apprentice. And then the paralegal apprentices that we have in the business at the moment may ultimately go on to qualify as a solicitor via the apprenticeship route. And we currently do have a trainee solicitor programme for graduates, and I guess as a challenge for us within the business will be having the two programmes, so the trainee solicitor graduate route and the solicitor apprenticeship route working cohesively together within the business, especially when they're so different. Hopefully that's been useful, but if anyone has any questions, you know, please feel free to ask them just now, or it was a very, I guess, high-level overview of our programme, but if you wanted any more information about any particular programme, I'd be very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Karen. I've got one question that's coming that I'd like to put to both you and Jonathan, just to see the slightly different perspectives on this. So I've had a question from Abby Jessup. Thank you for your question, Abby. All our apprenticeships will have to come from existing established posts, whether already filled or currently vacant, and line managers are very concerned about the 20% off the job requirement, as for them it represents a loss of 1 day's week worth of delivery time. How would you advise responding to that to allay their concerns? So if I could put that to you first, please, Karen.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I can see that why that would be difficult for firms that are looking to transfer their current employees onto an apprenticeship programme. For us, that aspect was probably a little easier because we didn't have apprentices before. So when we decided on the delivery, that was just the message that went out to the team. I guess depending on the programme that you're thinking of putting your current employees onto, it doesn't need to be 1 day out of the office per week. For example, for our business administration apprentice, you can very much work it based on the team requirements. So if the team has a particularly busy month or a busy time, you don't have to have the 20% off the job every week. It's overall on the programme, so you can be flexible and make it work for the business rather than having that 1 day out of the office per week. Does that help, that answer?
Thank you, Karen. That helps for me. Jonathan, I wonder, do you have anything that you'd like to add to that? Have you faced similar reservations from any of your existing clients?
Yeah, I think it is fair to say that upskilling of existing employees and 20% off the job is harder in many ways than with new employees, because obviously with new employees you can build the whole program and the expectations of the business, as Karen and her team at Princeton have done so well around the learning that the apprentice is going to need to do. I would second Karen's thoughts around it being an average. And it not needing actually to be 20% every week, and with the range of different things that can be counted. It isn't just time sort of out of the office on day release. That works well for some standards, but for, let's say, a management program for existing employees, that probably wouldn't be the delivery model, certainly not every week. I would come back to the importance of initial assessment in terms of getting people on side in an organisation. At the end of the day, if there is a knowledge, skills and behaviours gap that is big enough, then the benefit to the business should more than outweigh, if you like, that downtime cost of 20% off the job. I think the bigger challenges happen where perhaps there isn't quite enough of a gap, and of course, if there isn't quite enough of a gap, then arguably the apprentice isn't eligible in the first place. So yeah, so those are my thoughts really. But certainly, it is more challenging with existing employees than it is with new employees.
Thanks, Jonathan. If I can summarise what I think I've heard from the two of you to date in this webinar, because I can see that Abby's come back with a follow-up question, but if I can summarise it, it seems there are 3 learning points here. It's number 1, plan from the start how the 20% off the job will be delivered. Set expectations with the line managers, with the hiring managers, that this is a non-negotiable requirement. It has to be managed. It's something that is a condition of the funding, but at the end of the apprenticeship, you get a skilled, fully trained, competent employee. So there is something in it for you. Secondly, look at what is needed. So what learning will need to be undertaken, what will have to be done off the job as a theory-based exercise rather than learning on the job, and then look at when that's going to be needed. So are there certain things, and I'm looking down my list of level 3 apprenticeship standards, and I can see such things as gas engineer, emergency contact centre, paralegal, finance compliance and risk advisor and mortgage advisor. I think with all of those, there is a case for saying that there are certain prerequisites where you don't want somebody who doesn't understand the theory being let loose in a live environment until they've got their head around those basics. And then point 3 is that then and only then does the evidencing of the off the job requirement come into play. Would that be a fair summary, Jonathan and Karen, of what you've said to date?
Yeah, I mean that sounds like a really good summary, and I guess from my perspective, what works at Princeton Masons doesn't necessarily work for all employers, but like you say, essentially, the 20% off the job training is to support and develop the apprentices. So you've got to do something that does that, but also works for your individual business.
Yeah, and I'd second that. Certainly, it's not. It absolutely isn't, and I don't think it can be a one-size-fits-all model. 20% off-the-job training can be delivered in so many ways that, provided there's that gap there that the apprenticeship is needing to fill in terms of skills, knowledge, and behaviours, then it is always possible to come up with a model using all of the different tools that we've got at our disposal to be able to deliver it.
Thanks, Jonathan. Just one final question that's come in is who checks that 20% off the job learning has been achieved? And my understanding is that if there is any auditing to be done, that would be done by the ESFA. Is that also your understanding?
Yes, that's my understanding as well. I think the primary evidence is that evidence pack that's set up at the beginning, which is why it's so important that that's right. Ofsted have said explicitly that they're not going to be auditing 20% off the job, but I would take that sort of with a pinch of salt. I think it's fair to say that if it appears that apprentices aren't making progress, aren't learning, aren't being supported, then I'm sure that they, quite rightly, and the SFA as well, would then want to look further to see exactly what's happening, and it would become perhaps a little bit more of a checking or a bit more of an auditing process.
Okay, thanks very much, Jonathan. Moving on to our final two panelists now, we're going to look at the apprentice and the line manager's perspective, and I'm very pleased to say that I'm joined in the room here at 80 Strand by Ricardo Bertoldo, who's an associate project manager apprentice, and his job title is account executive within the BTEC and Apprenticeships division, and by his boss, Catherine Newman, who's the Director of Sales for BTEC and Apprenticeships. Good afternoon to you both.
Hi everybody, my name is Ricardo, and as Neil said, I'm an account executive within the BTEC and Apprenticeship division for Pearson. I am completing at the moment a level 4 apprenticeship in Associate Project Manager. I've started my apprenticeship last year in October. It's a new standard and will last for 2 years. And here with me, there's my manager as well, Catherine, who's going to introduce herself.
Thanks, Ricardo. Hello, yes, I'm Catherine Newman. I'm the Director of Sales, and that means I'm looking after field and office-based staff, which I think is quite important because quite often we're looking at apprentices who are office-based, which of course Ricardo is, but I've also had to consider how we do this for field-based staff as well. So that's quite an interesting mix. And I've got actually 14% of my team, I'm happy to say, who are apprentices. So actually, I feel quite skilled now to be able to talk about this because at Pearson, and I thank you, Neil, for introducing Pearson. I'm not going to go through Pearson again for everybody, but we have a line which is saying always learning. I feel I certainly have been always learning on the apprenticeship route. Happily, I would say, I think, you know, like Jonathan and Karen, I think I feel very positive about it. I was interested in the question earlier on, that the concerns. I'll certainly come on to that in a minute because I've had concerns at the beginning, but I think I've worked through that, which is, you know, which is say I think that's important to acknowledge the things one struggles with and then how you overcome it. So that's an introduction to me. I'm going to go on to talk about how we set it up and sort of the pros and cons of that, and actually interestingly touch on quite a few of the things that have come up today. So when we thought about how we set it up, we did start off with the worrying about how you monitor everything. And it's so interesting to hear Jonathan say, you know, and Karen, we're not going to worry about every second and every minute, because actually that's where we've got to. We certainly do use diaries. Everybody has and blocks out 1 day a week for their 20%. But with Ricardo, how we work it is we talk about it. I mean, obviously at one-to-one, so we'd have a one-to-one meeting every month, sometimes more regularly. and we would keep it under review so that we don't get too rigid, because the important thing is that Ricardo is studying in the way he wants to study, and it might mean in a week that he did more than 20% off the job if that week required it and another week didn't. What Ricardo does is make sure within his own time and his own diary he is monitoring that 20%, so he would let me know if he feels that's not working out. And so I'm certainly relaxed if it's more, because if it's related to what he's doing in his job, it's completely fine. It's just making sure, obviously for all those funding rules, that we're absolutely covering that 20%. But as we've gone along, actually, I've become more relaxed about it in terms of we are monitoring it. And the only thing I've said to my teams are, don't make it too bitty. I think you've got to have some solid quality time off the job. And I think if somebody's doing an hour here and an hour there, that for me isn't quality. And for me, it is about a quality apprenticeship. So I would sort of stress that. I think that you've got to have some quality time. But certainly, I think putting it in diaries, making sure it's in there, is absolutely the way we've gone. I would also just emphasise, you know, obviously the funding rules are really important. You did mention time off in lieu earlier on. We didn't, you know, we've got to be clear about that. If people are studying in their own time, we're giving that time back in lieu. So I think, you know, again, it's about being flexible, but really just working with your apprentice, going through their diary, and making sure that works out really. And I've found with all of the apprentices, not just the office based but the field based as well, that's working out very well. So I'll hand over to you, Ricardo, because you were going to talk about your personal experience.
Yeah, so in terms of the experience, so far it's been a really good experience, and I think the main reason for the fact that it's been good is because the 20% of the job has been quite a flexible part from Pearson. So as Catherine has said, I have 1 day a week where is my study time. However, if for whatever reason 1 week I need to be in work or I need to be at my desk all 5 days, I can do maybe 2 half days. We can swap it around and use the time in a flexible way. The other thing is that we're monitoring the 20% of job through the training provider. He has provided me and the other apprentices a VLE. So the program is in an online system, which is counting how much time I'm spending on completing the different units. However, the system is also allowing me to add manually other learning and training that I've done. So in the training provider system, I can add one-to-one mentoring session or other events that I attend, online learning. As I'm doing a project management apprenticeship, we've also got a membership of the APM, and when they run events, especially an online webinar, we're able to use that as part of the 20% as well. The other thing is obviously the monitoring sessions that we have regularly with the training provider, and obviously myself and Catherine are both involved in those sessions. So I hand over to Catherine again just to explain a bit more about that.
Yeah, so talking a bit more about the monitoring. I think, yes, it's absolutely critical, I think, to be there in person at the review meetings, and the ones we've had with Ricardo, I'm making sure I'm physically there and meeting with the training provider and making sure we're talking through, you know, all the different issues, things that are working, things that are not working, and that, you know, I'm seeing the VLE as well and making sure I'm looking at that. So it's kind of, it's a good checkpoint for me actually to make sure I'm on top of it, and it isn't just working with Ricardo on things, but really feeling there's a partnership with the training provider, which is really critical. And I also think, as I've experimented, shall we say, and you've already, and there was I love the pie chart, thank you for the pie chart, Karen, of all the different things that you can do. You know, we've been thinking creatively as we've been developing this. So you've got, you know, we started off thinking it was study time, or you had to get fixated on certain things. And then as my mind opened to the other ways of off the job, it's allowed not just Ricardo, actually, my other apprentices to think how they're working with other bits of the business, actually, on things that are really helping them, but also helping the business, and it's really growing the role that they're doing. So it's actually, you know, going back to Jonathan's point about this being a real quality offer, and not just a tick box of what they already do, the experiences of what the apprentices are doing really in that 20% outside to develop their skills. So it could be confidence skills, how proactive they are. It isn't just about the detail, it's really developing them as people. I've found that has been really, really useful. So I would stress it's really important for that monitoring, working with the training provider, and I think that's really critical. So that's how I would conclude.
Okay, thanks very much, Catherine. Thanks, Ricardo. So that's the end of our programmed content for today. However, we're going to stay on the line for a few minutes. So if anyone does have any further questions, please do feed them through now, and I'll put them to the presenter or presenters. If you don't have any questions and you feel that you've got value out of this event, then I wish you good afternoon. We have had one question come in, which I would just like to address here. Is it the responsibility of the employer or the training provider to ensure that 20% off the job happens? Well, I would say that that's everyone's responsibility, because the training provider is responsible for delivering a high quality apprenticeship program, and it's the employer's levy money, or indeed the government's money for a non-levy paying employer, that is being that is conditional on that 20%. So I would say it's down to everyone, and also, and Ricardo's making furious gestures at me to indicate that it's his responsibility to make sure that he's getting that 20% off the job. We've also got a few questions about, and mentioned reviews being geared up for EPA. Any ideas, please, on what is on there? So I'm going to ask if we can just open up Jonathan's mic on this one, because I think this is probably something that he would have a view on. So in terms of gearing up for EPA, there's a couple of different things that you can do to make sure that you're tying your program back to what the apprentice is ultimately going to be tested on. And I think the first one is a really obvious one that's probably so obvious that people overlook it. There's an assessment plan, and it's a matter of public record, and that is what your apprentice will ultimately be EPA'd on. So if the first time that you're looking at that plan is at Gateway, then I would say you probably missed a trick there. Jonathan, is there anything else that you specifically do to tie in the 20% off the job learning to the actual EPA criteria?
Yeah, thanks. I suppose the thing that we've done, and it's something we're still developing, but when the first standards came out and we started delivering them, we wanted to make sure that apprentices were being prepared sort of across their journey for EPA, so that it didn't come as too much of a surprise to them, and also that we were measuring that progress was happening. And so what we've done is we've developed I suppose what might be called sort of super reviews, midpoint assessments, that depending on the program happen every 4 to 6 months, and those we conduct very often using somebody who isn't the apprentice's sort of main trainer, so it'd be another DAMAR colleague, and those assessments are designed to mimic, insofar as possible, the endpoint assessment. So they're mini versions, if you like, of the endpoint assessment. They won't cover everything in the EPA, but they will feature very often, for example, a professional discussion or certain elements of the endpoint assessment. So we're doing those maybe every 4 to 6 months through the program, which hopefully tells us that the apprentice is on track. And if the apprentice is on track, then logically, if we've assessed them right at the beginning, they should be getting 20%. And then the only other thing to think about is, as you're getting ready for Gateway at the end, is it possible to do mock endpoint assessments, really to give you evidence that the apprentice is there in terms of the level of competence that they need. So, for example, some of the legal apprenticeships that we deliver, the paralegal apprenticeship standard, for example, and conveyancing is the same, have some scenario-based tests embedded within the endpoint assessment. Well, understandably, we wouldn't be keen, and nor would our employers keen, for apprentices to go through to endpoint assessment unless they'd had a go at pretty much under full exam conditions and had passed a mock scenario-based test. So the whole idea is that when they come up to actual endpoint assessment, they've done lots of professional discussions, they've done some scenario-based tests, they've done all of the components that they're going to see in the endpoint assessment at different points through their apprenticeship journey. So that's what we're doing, but I'm sure other providers will be coming up with other tools and models as well.
That's good advice, Jonathan. Thank you very much for that. So I'd like to conclude by saying thank you very much to our panelists, Jonathan Bourne, Karen Murray, I almost called you Karen Mason, my apologies, from Vincent Mason's, Catherine Newman and Ricardo Bertoldo. So that concludes today's session, everyone. Thank you very much for your time and have a very good afternoon.